In the beginning, there existed a world of gray, known as the Age of Ancients. Lacking distinct form, its fog-like totality was said to have featured barren crags, colossal arch trees, and an untold number of everlasting dragons. But then, mysteriously, there was fire, which introduced disparity to this wavering order. The first flame brought heat and cold, life and death, light and dark, and inherently, chaos. There followed the appearance of numerous creatures drawn to the flame, a great cosmic war with the stone-scaled dragons, and eventually, a new age, the Age of Fire, built upon a foundation remnant to the old, the enormous branches of the arch trees. However, where did this flame come from? And what exactly was its true nature? In the events after its inception, this flame proved to be more than simple fire, as you or I would know it. When compared to the frail flickering of a candle, or the soothing warmth of a winter hearth, its properties exhibit our expectations, yet go beyond our personal experiences, deep into the realms of myth. What might we learn from our own folklore and legends, which could expand upon our understanding of this strangely familiar, yet unfamiliar fire? Or could the answers lie in our scientific knowledge of the world around us? I'm Brett Edwards, and I welcome you to join me as we explore the ideas and archetypes related to the origin of the first flame. This is Dark Souls, a new mythology. Following the discovery of the Higgs boson by the CERN supercollider in 2012, world-renowned theoretical physicist Michio Kaku postulated the initial occurrence of the Big Bang in terms that may remind you of something else. Here's part of what he had to say, paraphrased from an article written for the Wall Street Journal. What was the match that set off the initial cosmic explosion? What put the bang in the Big Bang? In quantum physics, it was a Higgs-like particle that sparked it. The Higgs boson also answers another profound physical question. Why is the universe so unsymmetrical and broken? The latest thinking is that just before the Big Bang, the universe was very tiny, but also perfectly symmetrical. All the masses of the particles were the same, but the presence of Higgs-like particles shattered this perfect symmetry. Once the symmetry was broken, the particles were free to assume the various masses we see today. Does this theory sound familiar? Kaku describes a state of perfect symmetry prior to the Big Bang, which was broken by the introduction of disparity. If the appearance of the first flame was the equivalent of the Big Bang to the Dark Souls universe, then what was the Dark Souls universe's equivalent to the Higgs boson? Let's examine what we know about the first flame's true nature, to look for clues which might help us deduce this source. Disparity in the forms of heat and cold, life and death, light and dark. These opposing yet relative concepts also find commonality in our current understanding of physics. The laws of thermodynamics which govern our own universe appear to be the same for the world of Dark Souls. However, beyond the scorching heat of the Iron Keep or the frozen wastes of Aleum Lois, heat and cold seem to remain only simple descriptors for states of energy. You can hold a torch to stave off the effects of frostbite more quickly in Dark Souls 3, and across the whole trilogy, embers are described as exhibiting the faint warmth of the first flame. But these mundane facts, in my opinion, do not tell us anything noteworthy about the flame itself. The creation of life and death, however, grants us our first substantial evidence regarding the flame's nature, as well as raises our first questions. As the opening cinematic of Dark Souls states, right after the first flame appears, "Then from the dark they came, and found the souls of lords within the flame." What we know of the Age of Ancients describes a world where only the archtrees and everlasting dragons existed. But with the coming of fire, new beings emerged. The beginning of life, according to this opening cinematic, raises questions about the very existence of the archtrees and dragons. For if there was no life prior to the flame, then that would mean the archtrees and dragons were not alive. This leads us to two different possibilities. First, that the archtrees and dragons were not living prior to disparity, and that the flame granted them life. Or second, that the archtrees and dragons were never alive, even after the flame appeared, but instead were beings animated by something other than life. Support for this second possibility is in the supposed immortality of the dragons. This quality is bestowed upon them by their stone scales, according to many sources in Dark Souls game lore. However, I believe this everlasting quality of their existence was not attributed to their scales, and was actually lost upon the flame's inception. The truth can only be with the first scenario, that the archtrees and dragons were granted life with the fire. Why, you might ask? It all falls upon the creation of something else when disparity was introduced to the Age of Ancients. Something which the opening cinematic neglected to mention, but, much like the Big Bang of our own universe, must have started with the first flame: time. In the absence of time, all things in the perpetually gray symmetry of the Age of Ancients were immortal. Thus, to call the dragons everlasting would make perfect sense in that context. But once they were granted life, and the possibility of death, their immortality was forced to come from a new source. The tale of the dragons and the nature of time are subjects to revisit in another episode. What's important to note from this tangent is that regardless of existence prior to the flame, all things in the Dark Souls universe were granted life and death when the flame arrived, without exception. When discussing any cosmogony, which simply means the story of how a world was created, it's vital to focus on every detail, as even the smallest pieces of information could hold incredible importance and numerous meanings. I believe it is no secret at this point that Miyazaki and the team behind Dark Souls production were influenced largely by European mythology and modern fantasy pop culture when crafting their new video game world. So, let's take a look at some of those possible sources, which could help confirm any suspicions we might have about the first flame. One of the oldest and most documented creation myths from ancient Europe is that told by the Eddas, Old Norse works of prose and poetry originating from the Icelandic and Scandinavian regions. According to Norse mythology, the primordial state of things, prior to life, was known as Ginnungagap. It was a dark void of nothingness, neighbored by existing worlds, which were home to the elements of fire and ice. Eventually, fire and ice crept closer together across the abyss of Ginnungagap, and when they finally met, fire melted the frost. Born from the meeting of fire and ice was Ymir, first of the giants. And as the frost continued to melt, other beings emerged. Ultimately, this resulted in the establishment of new lands, populated by giants, gods, and other strange creatures, including an enormous tree known as Yggdrasil, which was connected to all 9 worlds of the cosmos by its roots and branches. Without going into more detail, as the identities and relationships of many places and beings in Norse mythology will be further explored in future episodes of this series, we can already see a few common themes. A primordial, unchanging state, void of living things. The introduction of fire, which helped create all forms of life. And a great tree, foundational to the new cosmos which was born around it. Whether or not these specific ideas from Norse mythology were meant to be recreated in Dark Souls is unknown, but the possibility is, at the least, somewhat likely. Not just because of the resurgence of many stories and characters from the Eddas in today's popular culture, but because these ideas are not unique to the tales told by the ancient peoples of Northern Europe. It is a widely accepted belief that modern fantasy literature started with the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. The iconic world presented in The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and The Silmarillion helped shape the inspiration for countless authors and artists to follow. This eventually culminated with the joining of modern fantasy's ideas and its growing fan base into a global phenomenon. In the late 1970s and throughout the 80s, Dungeons & Dragons reached widespread popularity, and its foundation formed the imaginative framework through which a large portion of future authors and game designers explored and created new worlds. Of the many universes which comprise the settings for D&D, the Forgotten Realms are among the most renowned. According to the lore of the Forgotten Realms, an omniscient and ambivalent entity known only as the Luminous Being is responsible for the creation and destruction of all universes. This luminous being ordered Ao, the Overgod, to create the universe which would eventually become home to the Forgotten Realms. It was initially an empty expanse, held within the confines of a crystalline shell, sort of like an egg, which would later be called realm space. At that time, realm space was composed of only primordial essences, left over from its inception. Ao was not finished, however, as these primordial essences were then condensed and given form. This was the birth of the twin sister deities, Selûne and Shar. Selûne and Shar went on to create the planets within realm space and all life on them, but they were opposed as to the fates they should bestow upon these worlds and creatures. They fought furiously against each other, and from these cataclysmic events were born the other gods of realm space. Gods and goddesses of war, disease, death, and everything else you'd imagine within a mythological pantheon of deities. Eventually, Selûne reached outside of their universe, beyond its crystalline egg, into a realm of fire. She pulled some of the fire back into realm space and used it to create a sun, which brought light and warmth to all of the celestial bodies and their inhabitants. Shar, enraged by Selûne's actions, began to erase all light and warmth from the universe. And during their ensuing final battle, the two sisters nearly tore each other apart. Henceforth, given their weakened states, the lesser gods took over governance of the Forgotten Realms, and Selûne and Shar put an end to their cosmic war. Though the Forgotten Realms are but one universe in which Dungeons & Dragons campaigns can be set, this universe does not necessarily stand apart from the others. In many settings, the multitudinous realms of D&D reside within an astral plane, which is sometimes described in the shape of a tree, branching out and connecting all the planes of existence. Once again, I'm sure you can see parallels between the creation of the Forgotten Realms and the world of Dark Souls. A primordial state without light or warmth. The introduction of fire, which helped nurture life, and a great tree, foundational to the cosmos, which this new world was created within. Suffice it to say, there are numerous other creation myths and fantasy universes that I could delve into, which exhibit these same archetypes. Even the Book of Genesis, held by believers in Judaism and Christianity to be the true creation story of our own universe, has its similarities to these archetypal images and events. However, the Book of Genesis also relates to ideas in other cosmogonies. There is one other creation story I'd like to touch upon before we draw our conclusions about the First Flame, as I think this different perspective is incredibly valuable and alludes to many aspects of Dark Souls lore beyond the flame. When organizing the many types of creation myths that exist, the ones we have covered so far all fall under the category called ex nihilo, which is a Latin phrase meaning out of nothing. But there is another common cosmogony, especially among Eastern cultures, that of the cosmic egg. The broad similarities between all of these cosmic egg stories are the birth of an important deity and the formation of the world when the egg split in two, forming the sky and everything beneath it. In the West, the cosmic egg also appeared in Greek mythology, thanks to the influences of Orphism. It is debated whether these ideas were influenced by contact with Near Eastern cultures, especially the ancient religion of Zoroastrianism. But that doesn't explain why a cosmic egg also appears in the creation story of Finland or in Celtic folklore. The cosmic egg I am most interested in, for the purposes here, is that of the Orphic tradition. According to Orphic beliefs, the cosmic egg existed in a primordial mist or watery darkness. It was depicted as an enormous silver egg surrounded by a coiled serpent. The egg itself is tied to the preeminent forces of time and necessity, or in some variations, time and night. In my research, it was unclear whether the egg was created by these pre-existing cosmic forces, or if they were formed by the splitting of the egg. Regardless, the symbology of the Orphic egg was extremely important to the later explorations of Gnosticism, a belief system which was born as ancient Christian theologians delved into the occult connections between the different but oftentimes similar concepts found in all religions and myths, searching for deeper meaning and ultimate knowledge. It is in this symbolism, tied to the Orphic tradition and Gnostic interpretation, that we find some interesting parallels to Dark Souls lore. Without delving too far into disparate Gnostic beliefs and theories, the serpent is sometimes attributed as a feminine symbol, which holds true in this particular instance, as the Orphic serpent literally coils around the egg, nurturing and protecting it. An interesting interpretation stemming from this is that the cosmic egg depicts Earth, while the serpent's coils represent the path of the moon's orbit. The serpent and the moon, you see, are often intertwined in Gnostic beliefs, as the moon is also a feminine symbol. The serpent is a symbol most often associated with knowledge, however, and in some beliefs is credited with the creation of humanity itself. So, how does this all relate to Dark Souls, you might be wondering? Well, when the Orphic egg split, the deity Phanes emerged, whose name means revealer or shining one, which is related to the Greek word for light, and by extension, the Latin word for shining one, Lucifer. After Phanes was born, he created all of the Greek gods, and was wed to Nyx, the personification of night, who was sometimes depicted as a large, black bird. As Nyx spread darkness and cold, Phanes was the day, which provided light and warmth. Now, I realize there is a lot to unpack here conceptually, and I promise to do so at length in future episodes. But if you are at all familiar with the lore of Dark Souls, I am sure you can see why Gnosticism, as it relates to Orphic tradition, could shed some light, if you'll pardon the pun, on some hotly contested and vague ideas surrounding serpents of knowledge, black birds of the night, a mysterious egg, and the incontrovertible connection between light and dark. Once again, I would like to present the words spoken in the Dark Souls opening cinematic. Then from the dark they came, and found the souls of lords within the flame. After looking back on the different myths and ideas we've delved into during this episode, it's time to think about what all of this may mean in regards to the beginning of the Dark Souls universe and the true nature of the first flame itself. It is clear from this quote that the creation of light and dark is where life began in Dark Souls. For when the light of the first flame cast shadows, creating dark, the darkness is where those who would claim the souls within the flame emerged. If we consider this creation story as one of the ex nihilo variety, Western mythological archetypes would point toward the first flame originating from somewhere outside of the Age of Ancients, just like fire encroaching upon Ginnunga Gap, or Saloon reaching out and pulling fire into realm space. This scenario presents three possibilities. The first flame could have been introduced by a deity, such as the luminous being, Ao the Overgod, or Saloon. The flame itself, either through a will of its own or pure coincidence, entered the Dark Souls universe from somewhere else. Or the flame simply came from nothing entirely, ex nihilo. There's insufficient evidence in official Dark Souls lore to support any of these theories, except for the last. However, just as humanity searches for existential meaning through science by confirming the Higgs boson and its relationship to the Big Bang, as an invested fan of Dark Souls and the complex melting pot of mythology and legend its world was built upon, I feel like there has to be more to the first flame than simply appearing out of nothing. There is hidden knowledge to be explored behind the lore we know, and I intend to discover what possible truths are waiting to be uncovered. Either by outside force or inherent ability, the first flame entered the Dark Souls universe and fundamentally changed it. The new world was granted the passage of time, and with it, life, death, light, dark, warmth, cold, and color, lest we forget the eternal gray of the Age of Ancients. And as the flame shined its light upon this new world, it revealed all else in its creation, just like Phanes as he emerged from the cosmic egg. What if the first flame itself is the equivalent of Phanes, Lucifer, or other light-bringing and fire-bringing deities? Does the first flame have a will of its own? What relationship does the flame have with the dark, and by extension, humanity? These are some of the questions I will try to answer in part 2 of this ongoing series. For now, I'll leave you all with this: the final word spoken by Aldia, scholar of the first sin in Dark Souls 2. The only character in all of Souls lore who may have glimpsed the ultimate truth of the first flame, because he refused to believe that the flame came from nothing. There is no path beyond the scope of light, beyond the reach of dark. What could possibly await us? And yet, we seek it insatiably. Such is our fate. Thank you for watching this episode of Dark Souls: A New Mythology. This series is written and produced by me, Brett Edwards. Some of you may be familiar with my band, Soulmass, where we've adapted the lore of Dark Souls to the sounds of punishing death metal and somber doom metal. The Soulmass YouTube channel hosts this video series, so if you're interested in hearing more, you can check out some of our uploaded music here on the same channel. Music for Dark Souls: A New Mythology was composed by Patches the Soundbringer. If you'd like to listen to or purchase his music for this series, you can find a link to his Bandcamp page in the video description. Original artwork for the series was created by Samuel Nelson. You can find a link to his art page in the video description as well, where he sells original work and takes commissions if you're interested in art for an album cover, book cover, or illustrations. Narration was recorded at SciaticAudio by Aaron Sluss and engineered by Brett Windnagle at Hypometric Studio. The Dark Souls opening cinematic footage used in this video was recorded by Devinguy. He streams video games on Twitch, including lore-centric Soulsborne playthroughs. So check out his channel, linked in the video description, if you are interested in watching him play the games and hearing his take on Souls lore. Demon Souls, the Dark Souls series, and Bloodborne are properties of FromSoftware, Namco Bandai, and Sony Interactive Entertainment. All of the videos, songs, images, and graphics used in this video belong to their respective owners, and I, or this channel, do not claim any right over them. Under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, allowance is made for fair use, for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, education, and research. Until we meet again, my fellow undead, don't you dare go hollow.